All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Sacred Margins. And this week we are continuing our conversation about conversation. So that's exciting. Last week we talked a little bit about why we have kind of lost this art of conversation. And so today we want to talk a little bit about what we need to do to reclaim conversation and what we need to do to maybe get us back to the point where we're not competing with other people as we talk. And the very first thing that you have to talk about when you reclaim the art of conversation is learning to listen well. I think that is probably with all the things that we deal with and losing conversation, I think that's the first thing that goes out the window is we forget that when we're talking to other people that we're actually supposed to listen and learn. So Alan, why do you think that we have such a hard time listening?
Well, we kind of hit on a couple things in the first video, which kind of tells the story of how the deck is a little stacked against us with our culture, with our technology, and just the world around us. And the two things we hit on was the idea of technology and culture. We live in a culture that our brains are trained towards short attention spans. So listening does not develop well in that culture. So we the way that we communicate trains us to talk at one another rather than taking the time to listen. So the deck is stacked against us there. And, you mentioned it, the idea of competition, that we often communicate with the idea of winning the conversation. And listening at its core is an act of respect. Listening takes time. So in a culture where time flows so segmented and so quickly, to actually sit down, to take the time to have the attention, it is something that's sometimes counterintuitive to our schedule. But also the fact that listening is the act of respect. So if you're trying to win the conversation, listening's not number one on your priority. But if you're communicating in order to understand, which I know you'll hit on in just a second, that is something you have to intentionally do. It does not always come easily or naturally from us. And so to give someone the ultimate respect of listening to them is really the beginning of an actual good, responsible conversation. And I know you talk a little bit about how we communicate and really just the pragmatics of how we normally communicate, that listening doesn't always fit into that very well. So, listening has to be intentional because we don't always go into the conversation with that as our intent. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, and, so I hate talking on the phone, and I'm an introvert. I don't like doing it. And to me, the greatest thing is text messages, because I can shoot out a text message to somebody and I give just enough information for what is useful for that conversation. And that's kind of what bothers me about talking on the phone is you have to just kind of sit there, and the long silences are a little more uncomfortable on the phone. But text messages, man, it's just get to the point. And if you think about how many times in conversation you have that impulse, somebody starts going on, somebody starts rambling, and you start tapping your foot and you go, all right, let's just get to the point. My son tells these long, extravagant stories, and I'm like, okay, let's wrap it up. Get to the point. What is the purpose of this conversation? Or we want people to get to the point because we want to make our point. So maybe it's not even a pragmatic thing. Maybe it goes back to that winning thing. Because, oh yeah, I know what I'm going to say next. And so listening makes us to kind of pause from our own responses. And it also kind of keeps us from being pragmatic. The art of good conversation is not pragmatic at all. It is creating that space. It is the awkward silences. It is those things that we have to do so I can actually listen and learn from the other person instead of listening to respond, because that's what we normally do is I want to hear what you have to say just so I can catch this little piece of information and use it to make my point. Or I shut you down about halfway through the conversation because I already disagree with you and I'm going to rip your argument to shreds.
Yeah.
Listening is much different than that. Listening is, like you said, creating space and creating respect for the other person to say, I'm going to hear everything you have to say, and I'm going to assume in the things that you have to say, I have something to learn.
Yeah. Well, you talked about that idea of everybody has been in a conversation with that person who you can tell they're just waiting for their chance to talk.
Hmm.
Or they're just waiting for you to get to the point. I think that's really powerful because, and I take that really personally because I'm a task-driven person. And so I often find myself in that role and not understanding how that's really disrespectful
Yeah.
to just be waiting to get out of whatever I need to get out of that other person. I'm not really listening. I'm
Hmm.
just kind of waiting for that moment to jump on whatever I need out of that person so I can move on to the next task or thing that's going on. And that's why for me, I mean, when I talk about listening being counterintuitive, it's very difficult sometimes because like you said, it's a different skill.
Hmm.
It's a different, often I'm trying to do something very different and it's relationship driven rather than pragmatically task driven. And
Absolutely.
that's tough for me. But the ultimate respect you can give someone is to do that. And we've all also had that experience where you've walked away and thought that person actually listened to me.
Hmm.
We know that feeling, and so it's a really powerful thing. And I think if we have the ability just to listen, that's a great first step towards actually being able to converse better. Uh,
Yeah.
you know,
And it's
so
just amazing. You can't fake listening. You know,
right,
you just can't. Everybody knows when you're in a real conversation, you know if you're being listened to or not. And so it takes a lot of intentionality to just go and say, hey, I'm here to learn from you and to hear what you have to say. And often, if we're too quick to get to the point, we may assume that their point is something different than it really is, and we may actually miss a really important part of the journey to get to whatever the point may be.
yeah,
And so, it's really important to create that space.
yeah. Because often I think sometimes we think that we converse so that we can agree, and that's something we'll hit on a little bit later in some other videos. But if the very base we get out of a conversation is we feel heard and understood, that's often a really successful conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And agreement may come later, changed minds may come later, and that's often important. But the number one thing that we need to get out of any conversation is that everyone walks away feeling heard and understood. And
Yeah.
so we're going to take some more videos over the next few weeks. We're going to talk about the way we think. We're going to actually talk about how to agree or disagree well. So hopefully you'll join us for those. If you missed the first one on the art of conversation, go back and take a look at that one. But check us out on Facebook. Check out our YouTube channel. As we've said before, if there's anything that you'd like us to talk about or discuss, please hit us up, email us, make a comment. We'd be happy to do that. So otherwise, we'll see you next week, and grace and peace, everybody.
Bye, guys.